Nothing will crush a real estate investor's spirit like landlord stress. The difference between being successful and miserable in managing properties is education. Welcome to Landlord University, where landlords learn. Landlord University is recorded from inside the RentPrep office, where Stephen White and Jeff Pearson share the lessons learned from working with some of the most successful landlords.
Welcome to Landlord University. I'm Jeff Pearson, and this is my co-host,
Stephen White.
Hello, Stephen. How are you doing today?
Pretty good, Jeff. How about you?
Doing well. You know, we have a little bit of news to catch up on. For the last month or two, we've had a little bit of a problem with our iTunes feed. And finally, we have things back on track and we're moving forward again. We're actually showing up on iTunes. So we've been doing this podcast. For some people that think we kind of disappeared, we've actually been doing this the whole time and been on a pretty regular schedule, except for the fact that our feed wasn't feeding into iTunes properly. So for all of you iTunes listeners, welcome back. And we hope that you'll help share the love and let some other people know about this. And if you haven't, be sure to rate us on iTunes. You know, give us a little bit of feedback. Hopefully you really like what you're hearing and you'll be excited to give us that ranking and rating.
Yeah, and I think it flew under the radar for a while because we do have so much traffic coming straight from our website. And
Exactly.
So we didn't really notice a whole lot of missing anything was missing there. I didn't hear about anything, but yeah, it was one of those things where we caught it and said, wait a minute, something's not right.
Yep.
So
it's
yes.
nice to be back on iTunes. I mean, that's where it all seems to start from. So we're looking forward to seeing some even more great results over the next couple of weeks and months.
Absolutely. Yes.
So today we're going to talk about expunged records. Tell us a little bit about that.
So expunged records, just in definition, we'll cover that, means that it's a record that should not be reported any longer. So it's something that should be removed. And it's something that we run into fairly often in a background check company where we may see something that somebody was arrested for. And then next to it, it says expungement, meaning it exists, it happened, that person may have gotten arrested or whatever happened. But the courts had then decided that that record should be removed and they shouldn't be, that shouldn't be held against them, basically. It shouldn't even come up in a database. So there's a difference between something being expunged and something being dismissed. And I'll explain the difference between the two because we had a situation come up just this week. So it's a perfect time to talk about it. We had a guy who was arrested for shoplifting, and the record existed because he was arrested for shoplifting. The charges were dismissed. So whatever happened in the court case, he went to court. Who knows? Maybe the store representative didn't show up and it was dismissed because of that. Or maybe he provided evidence showing, that he didn't do it, or whatever the case is, they didn't charge him with it. That was dismissed. That record is still reportable. It still exists. It was still an arrest. So even though it wasn't a conviction, a misdemeanor conviction, or a felony conviction, it still exists. A landlord can still use it as part of information in their decision-making process. Expungement is different altogether because expungement means you can't even use that record. It doesn't even exist. And most of the time we're seeing expungements when something was filed against somebody either in error, or they're just completely innocent and they shouldn't have been charged with it, and that record shouldn't exist whatsoever. Or they made a deal. They made some sort of a plea deal. Maybe they dimed their friend out. I don't know. And the deal was, listen, if you give us this information or if you play ball, we'll expunge the record. It'll be as if it never existed. So in those cases, those records don't exist. We can't even report that there was an arrest. We can't report that it was dismissed or anything at all. It literally just doesn't show up. It will appear as if it was never there.
I think expungement can also be where somebody after some period of time goes back to the courts and asks to have their record expunged. You know, they show that they're a good citizen and whatever it was that they were convicted of is something that is in their past. And so sometimes that can happen as well.
Yeah, we see a lot of that in Texas for some reason. I'm not sure why. But yes, that is true too. If it's a felony, which would normally stay on their record for life, they can go back and say, "Hey, I changed my life. I don't want this to affect me anymore." Doesn't mean that it's always going to happen. The courts are going to make a decision. Some judge is going to make a decision on whether or not that's going to happen or not.
Right.
Um, the problem with expunged records, or I should say, the problem with background checks and expunged records, is um, sometimes the courts don't communicate with databases that records are expunged. And so what happens then is obviously those records are reported when they shouldn't be. And so there you have a potential issue, obviously. And trust me, people will know as soon as they see a record on there that should not have shown up. Every once in a while, we'll get those phone calls from a tenant or an applicant who says, "Hey, you guys reported that I was shoplifting. That was when I was 19, and the courts agreed to expunge that, and it's still on there." Sometimes we find that it was the court error, and
Right.
somebody didn't do their job, shockingly, in the courts, and that information was never articulated back to the databases, and of course it still shows up there. So in those cases, we'll work with the tenant or the applicant and help them get that record removed. So we'll help work with them to have the databases remove it, because it does us no good for us to remove it from our records, because we're just one company that may be using that particular database out of 50,000 background check companies. So you gotta kill it at the source, basically.
So do you guys actually see records of expunged records?
Yeah, we do, and it's tough, because obviously we have two jobs. One on one end of it, we've really got to protect the landlords. Obviously, on the other end of it, it's our job as a background check company to also protect the people that we're reporting this information on. Some things aren't reportable, some things are reportable, but we have to treat that information sacredly. We have to make sure that we're doing the right things according to the FCRA and keeping everybody compliant. So sometimes it's tough to see a record in there and know it may be a real juicy one too, and
Mm.
it shows up as being expunged, and there's nothing that anyone can do. We have to act as if we never saw it.
Right. So
Which
you don't tell the landlord that
no,
you saw something. You have to just keep your mouth shut, and it
yes,
is what it is.
yes, which y- you know really is better for everybody that way, because if the landlord did see it, it's really hard to forget that you saw it. I think
Yes.
in a prior episode we had made a mention of a situation a while back where we had a sex offender where that was the case. Um, the guy was put actually on the sex offender registry and fought to get off of it and won the case, and had the record expunged, and it was supposed to be expunged, but the sex offender registry never updated their information or whatever, or maybe there was an overlap in the time. I don't remember exactly what the details were, but the bottom line is he shouldn't have been on the registry, but he was. Unfortunately, that landlord already saw it. So that's a hard thing to forget,
Yes.
once you see that. And even though we were able to work with the National Sex Offender Registry, work with this applicant, get it corrected for him, it was eventually removed. And then, of course, we, get back in touch with the landlord and say, "Hey, turns out the guy was right. He gave us all the documents to prove that it should be expunged, and now it's expunged. So here's your new report that shows it doesn't exist." Again, it's tough to turn a blind eye once you've already seen that. So in cases where we're seeing it, it's different than the landlord actually seeing it too.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Do you have any other thoughts about expunged records?
I would say the only other thing I'll mention is I would say 1 out of 10 records that we are told are expunged are actually expunged. So the proof is always in the documentation. If somebody just says that it's expunged, that may be their wish or their intent, but it doesn't mean that it is. If they have proof that it was, which they will have a court document, I've seen them many, many times, um, signed off saying that it's expunged, that there's an expungement order to remove a record, they'll have it. And trust me, they won't misplace it or lose it. They will have that record, and it exists somewhere, and they need that record as proof to be able to start removing stuff. Um, so don't always just trust somebody just because they know the verbiage or they understand, the language that goes along with it. If they tell you it's expunged, follow the proper steps, make sure that you see the documentation. If you're working with a background check company, make sure they're communicating with the background check company to make sure that everything gets fixed.
Makes a lot of sense. Well, great, Stephen. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And I look forward to talking with you tomorrow evening.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks for listening to Landlord University, and remember to visit rentprep.com/landlordu to see show notes and access free resources like forms and guides. And be sure to check out Jeff Pearson hosting his own hit podcast at thementorimpact.com.